and welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 209. Today is a feedback episode. We've had 3 people send in images for asking for various bits of feedback, so we're going to be looking at those. So, if you happen to be watching live, then leave a comment. Let me know you're here, let me know where you're from, let me know what the weather's doing, and let's get started with the podcast. Absolutely the wrong one there. Which one am I trying to do? Who'd have thought? Wrong one straight away. You know, I mean, 209 episodes in. One day I may just get the hang of the technicals on all this. Or maybe one day I'll be rich enough to hire somebody else to do the technicals for me, instead of trying to do everything with my left hand while my brain is trying to do the front stuff. Right, where are we then? Yes, so here we are today, episode 209, live on Facebook, as you can tell. So if you happen to be watching live, then yes, leave a comment, but also make sure you click the like, click the notification bell if you're here and you haven't been and done it already. Make sure you subscribe, all that kind of stuff. So today we're giving a feedback session. And so feedback, critique, this is your place to really get personalised feedback on your very own photos. There's not many places on the internet where you can do that. So it's well worth doing. Also, when you send in images, not only do you get the feedback on your images, but when I'm doing them here on the podcast, then everybody else gets a chance to see. And very often, when we're taking a look at somebody else's photo and they go, oh, well, you could have done that. And you go, oh, yeah, so they could have done that. And then you suddenly go, maybe I should be doing that with my own photo. So when you send in an image, you're not only helping yourself, but you're helping other members of the community too. And because of that, I give you bonus smug points. So everybody who sent in an image that I use gets a bonus 25 smug points. So just to give you a wee idea of where the smug point leaderboard is at the moment, where are we? So currently in the lead for September is Nadia with 35 smug points. Everybody else is sitting around sort of 5 or 10. However, that could all change because of the 3 people who sent in today. And for the third quarter, which will end at the end of this month, it's neck and neck with Sandra and Robert, both at 130, VG at 125, April at 120, and Marilyn at 110 smug points. So, a lot to play for. And there's still the abstract challenge. So I'll be telling you all about that later in the podcast. Right, meanwhile, I can see we've got a few people in and bits of comments have started. So Nadia says, hi from a bright and sunny Fife. April says, greetings from a beautifully sunny Long Island, New York. John Harvey says, good day from Colombo, Ohio. Great weather here for doing my senior pics. Is that senior as in old people? Or senior as in like kind of graduation or end of school type photos? Susan says, hi from Kakubri, where I'm pleased to say is turned into a gorgeous autumn day after a damp and miserable start. Yeah, so the weather in Kakubri is pretty similar to here because it's 9 miles down the road, although not always identical. Even though it's only 9 miles away, sometimes we do have quite different weather systems. But yes, similar kind of thing today. Robert says, howdy all from Texas. Other Robert Schaefer says, good morning from Dallas, Texas. It's going to be another hot one today. Yes, I've been hearing you've been getting some pretty hot temperatures down there. Susan says 210, Kim. Not sure what the 210 is. What's 210? You'll have to remind me what's 210. Is that a spelling mistake or is that... because it's not 210 miles between here and Kakubri, that's for sure. Jack says, good day, feeling great and glad to be here. Oh, that's great. 210 episode. Oh, right, is it episode 210? It is. Is it? Episode 210. Right, okay, my mistake. Episode 210. You might be right on this. Yes, you are right. Of course you're right. This is episode 210. Where are we? Janet says, hi from an overcast but clearing Powell River, British Columbia, close to the north end of something. North end of Highway 101, which goes all the way to Chile. Wow. Okay, now that would be a serious road to go down. Where else we say? Oh yes, yeah, that's right. Jack's joined us. So glad you could join us, Jack. Jack's has been through a bit of major surgery. I sent him a message earlier in the week, see how he was, and he said he was feeling better but missing taking the photos and wanted to say hi to everyone. But he's actually joined us as well. So hi Jack, I'm hoping your recovery is swift and uncomplicated. So glad you could join us. Where are we? Robert says, have a cup of coffee, Kim. I've already had one. I had one about half an hour ago. So I'm actually up on the coffee. And that's maybe the brain's just overstimulated, which is why I can't remember what episode we happen to be on. Right, okay. So, what are we going to do? Yes, let's make a start then. So what we're talking about then is the feedback session. Okay, so this is your chance, as I say, to get genuine feedback on your own images and to... So often we get to the point whereby we have an image, we're not totally sure, it's maybe not doing quite what we want it to, but we can't figure out why, or we kind of suspect it might be better if it was done a different way, or even we're quite pleased with it, except for the fact that nobody else seems to like it in the same way that we do. And we start to feel we're obviously missing something. So at that point then, getting genuine feedback on your photos can really help. So that's what this session is all about. And it could be a few weeks before we get another chance for one. So what we're going to do then is we're going to start with Sandra. So we've had 3 people sent in. So Sandra, April and Robert Schaefer have each sent in images. So these are, if anybody else sent in an image, I didn't get it. So apologies about that. But we'll start with Sandra. So let me see if I can find Sandra's photo and put this up for you. So Sandra then has said, I've been out practicing with my macro lens and I've used it on a 2.8 aperture to really get a shallow depth of field on my allotment yesterday. Well, yesterday for when she sent it, this was a few days ago. I attach a photo of a field of, verbenas? I've already been hauled up once by Maggie for mispronouncing my flower names when I was saying dahlias instead of dahlias. So I'm going to go with verbenas, and somebody can correct me later. With one main flower in sharp focus, with another slightly out of focus, and the rest of the flowers are just purple blobs of colour. The thing I'm not sure about is the slightly out of focus verbena. I'm wondering if the photo would look better without it. And I'd really appreciate your thoughts, as this is something I could easily have another go at as I go to my allotment at least 3 times a week. So I'll get Photoshop opened up and we'll take a little closer look at this photo. So we've got this flower shot, go with verbena, and in that notion, so using the macro lens automatically, because it's I think Sandra's one is 100mm macro lens or 105mm, you're already zoomed in, so you're going to get a narrower depth of field straight away, narrower depth of field than you would if, say, you were using a mid-range, a 50mm lens or a wide-angle 15mm lens or something like that. So a 100mm lens is really narrowing up your depth of focus. And then she's gone for a wide aperture, wide as you can go on this, a 2.8. So it's going to be the narrowest depth of field you can. And what we can see with this is, even on something like this, we can see that there's a thin line which is in focus. These little petals in the foreground are out of focus. We've got a line on the edge here which is in focus, and then it's just gone out of focus again. So we can see that the depth of field here is really, probably a centimetre, maybe less. I'm not entirely sure how big these flowers are to begin with. Now, what she's not sure about is she's got this beautiful flower coming up, and then what we've got is all these little purple blobs behind. And the purple blobs, the other flowers obviously, are what we would also call echoes. It's one of those things I've mentioned occasionally in these podcasts, but is a compositional technique in its own right, which is that notion of echoes. So you have your key subject, and then you have hints of that subject elsewhere. So that note, and it can be quite a powerful effect. So we know then that this isn't just an isolated flower. You could just as easily go out there and stick a piece of black card behind it and take a photo of it and isolate it out. These echoes create this whole kind of purple and green colour scheme that's going on. Now, the question is whether this one at the back here, this out of focus one, is adding to or detracting from the feel of the picture that that Sandra is communicating with us. So let's just take a look at this. Okay, I'll just really change this workspace a bit. Right, okay, we've now got the picture. So how do we balance this out? Now, one of the things I would say is when we look at this, my first thought is, if this is your key, is that it does kind of feel very bunched up over on the right here. There's a lot of space over on the left, and the point is, I suppose, well, you're trying to get in that back one there. And if the composition is to include this one behind, then you need to have that bit of gap at the top. But if it wasn't including this top one, then this main part of the flower being in the middle, it would feel like there's too much space at the top. As it is, I mean, I think actually you could pretty much, if you brought this over and you were to go for a portrait style of image, then actually something like that works quite well. So in terms of just a straightforward crop, we then, something like this, we now have our key subject, we have a supporting kind of echo, and then we've got a couple of other little blobs in the background. So that's the way I would go if you fancied like a portrait, and then you could maybe touch it up with a little vignette, a little bit of contrast, playing around with that. But if we go back to here, and I do tend to feel this is sort of slightly too far on the right. Now, if it was just about this, I would possibly sort of bring it down to something probably like this, except for the fact we've now got this stem behind. Now, what we might do at this point is just remove that stem. If I just select that area and then hit generate, this is now becoming so much quicker than doing the using the clone tool to find other bits of paste around. The auto generate area is then beautifully filling the gap, and it's given me three choices here, or three options rather. Either any of those will do. And then I think that in itself, that sits quite well. I think that works. If that is your key subject, if that's about, so you've now just got your key subject and you've got these little echoes in the background. And once again, like I say, you could, if you wanted, you could then give it a little bit of vignette, give it a little bit of contrast, anything you wanted to do with that, and just tidy that up a little bit. If you wanted to, let's go back to here. If you wanted to keep that included, now the problem is, if you're wanting to have this landscape, I think then this kind of ends up feeling a bit too, it does feel a bit too close, a bit too bunched up. And really at that point, what you might want to do is, if we sort of were to copy that, I'm not expecting you to, I wouldn't suggest doing this in Photoshop. What I'm doing is suggesting you maybe go out and do this in a separate shoot. But if we were to do something like that, and actually if we go back to this earlier one and just remove, should have done this in the earlier version, but okay, we'll just remove that bit again. And then what we can do, so the point that I really want to make here is that if you're going to have something that's slightly out of focus, is not to have it directly behind where it's overlapping. So now if we come back into here, you would sort of place it somewhere else. So something like that. Now obviously this is just cut out, so let's just do a little quick mask. Get rid of the little bit of that. This, now remember, bearing in mind this is a very, very rough edit, just to kind of give you a rough sort of sense of idea. And so what you could do is something like this, and then again we would just crop in a little bit closer, something like this. And so essentially you're going to go kind of going on a rule of thirds ish, where you've got this bit on the third and you've got this bit down on the third, so you're kind of creating a diagonal line that's running across. So now what you have is you have your key subject here sitting on the rule of thirds, nice little bit of diagonal coming up. You have your supporting cast, you're still recognizably what it is down here, and then we have the little echoes flipping about the place. So those really then, Sandra, those are the kind of three options that I would really say. So either then you want to think about the idea of cropping it in on a portrait way of doing it, or you want to just remove that bit and then kind of readjust so your verbena is staying in the right place, or just so it's just dominating and that's the only one that's grabbing our attention. Or if you're still really keen in having that one that's identifiable what it is, but that little bit out of focus, I would say you wanted to have one that's just where there's a bit of gap and you're kind of creating more of a composition so that it's supporting, maybe in a sort of slightly diagonally way, the other one. But for that, if to do that in camera, really you just want to be kind of moving around and seeing where the flowers are, which one you focus on, which ones are out of focus, where the balance lies. And it's really much better to do that in camera where you can see it rather than necessarily messing around in Photoshop afterwards, for something like this, I think. So hopefully that gives you a few ideas. Thanks very much for sending that one in, Sandra. Right, okay, where are we then? So let's close that. Right, various people saying welcome back to Jack, and Jack saying thanks, glad to be here. That's great. April says, I like the depth of field. Susan says, love the light on the verbena stem. April says, I like the echoes. Very nice removing the other flower. And Susan says, great edits. My preference is the portrait version. Okay, cool. Right, so where are we going to go next then? Let's go to April. So now, April sent in, let me just find this, a picture of an Indian elephant. She didn't go to India to take it, but she took it at the Bronx Zoo. So April says, this is a picture of Patty, the Indian elephant, at the Bronx Zoo. It was a complete challenge taking a picture of her because I was on a moving monorail many feet above. She was taking in all of the hellos and attention. She seemed very happy. Is there any way to brighten some of this picture? Any other suggestions? Thanks. Okay, so if you're on a moving monorail, if you're on any kind of moving thing and you're trying to take a picture of something that's static, then obviously you're kind of going to be up against it. And you're certainly not going to have necessarily any time to really arrange the background, sort out the thing. This isn't a place where it's going to be opportunistic. Now, what we find here when we look at Patty the elephant is essentially what the main problem here is that all the light is brighter behind her than and she is. So I think what's happened probably, because if you look down here, she's basically standing in shadow. There isn't any sun on her, but that path behind her looks like it's in sunlight. The trees or the plants life behind her is in sunlight. So because it's a fairly bright day over there, the camera, chances are, is kind of auto exposed onto the brighter light. So Patty's looking darker than you would hope. So what can you do about this? Well, really, it's about then, can we, in the editing process, what we're wanting to do is lighten the elephant and darken the background. So let's just open her in Photoshop. I'll just close down that one from Sandra. And composition wise, there's all sorts of things I might have done differently had you had the opportunity, had the place stopped, had the, your different angles, all this. One of the little things, I mean, you posted this on Facebook. I don't know whether you'd already cropped it or not, April. Again, that notion of a little bit more room to breathe feels a little bit close in. I'd want to just pull out a little bit of space underneath, just a touch more, something like that. Again, generative expand. I'll just hit that. Just to, again, that little bit more room to the crop feels very tight in, but I think just a little bit of space around her will kind of add a little bit. Well, we'll find out in a moment. Hopefully at some point. But the next stage we're going to move on to after this is this notion of what we can do to lighten and darken and bring more attention to the key subject. Because always, there we go, got a couple of different options here, that one, they're all a mix here. I think I probably quite like that one the best. Okay, so let's just go with that. So I'll select all, copy and paste that onto a fresh layer. So what we have now is we've got Patty, we've got a little bit more space around her. And if let's take this into camera raw for the moment. And maybe, the problem is, you see, is if I start brightening her up like that, I brighten her up, but the background also gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So what I might do is come here and bring the shadows up. So if I bring the shadows up, that starts to make her a bit lighter, although we've kind of got to be careful about making it a bit false. So maybe I brighten it up a bit more, but then take the highlights down. It's not making a lot of difference. Take the whites down. Yeah, okay, we're now kind of neutralizing. Everything's kind of moving this was slightly more. And then maybe I play with the contrast a little bit, something like that. We're sort of getting there. Maybe I'll give her a little bit of a vignette as well, just to kind of pull the corners in. I think that helps a little bit more. That kind of darkens down. And so we've got a brighter elephant. We're sort of getting there. What we can also do, though, is maybe just darken the background a little bit more. But to do that, now there's different ways of selecting. I can go here and I can kind of select nearly like this. There's also the option of Photoshop has select subject, which will do pretty much the same thing. Now I've kind of over selected, so if I hold down my Alt key, I just kind of unselect the ground around here, select back in her foot, unselect the gap between the feet, and I think that's not a bad selection. And then what I can do, now I've selected Nelly, what I can do is if I will invert the selection. So now I can Control or Command I, or just go to Select, Invert. So now what I've done is I've selected the background. And then if I go to, say, a curves level, I can now, you see, darken down the background. Now, as this darkens with curves, it also tends to hit the contrast, and the vibrancy goes up a little bit. So sometimes what you might want to do is maybe pull it down a little bit on the right and then darken it, something like that. Now, it's still kind of feeling slightly overdone. There's also patches where so you might need to kind of paint back in bits and pieces. I mean, but it is still kind of getting not brilliant. It's not a perfect thing. I would maybe, okay, let's lessen that a little bit. I'll take that opacity. I can just decide how much I want to bring it in. Maybe it's just overkill there. Bring that down a little bit, something like that. So we can see that it is kind of problematic when you've got too much light behind, but we're slowly making progress. Maybe again, if I select all that and put that into a fresh kind of thing. Now, if I go back into Camera Raw, hit Auto, not quite sure. The colours are maybe getting a bit too vibrant, but maybe if I take a little bit more contrast is kind of working a bit. Maybe take the effects, clarity a little bit, but the colours are overcooking. So if I go to the colour and just bring that vibrance back down and maybe pull the saturation back in a bit, I think it makes it look a little bit more realistic. So now I think we're kind of getting somewhere. Another option here is to try and blur the background a little bit, and for that you can play around with the same kind of selections. Photoshop again, though, if I go to back into Camera Raw, actually has a thing called depth blur. If I go to the lens blur and click Apply, and it's just thinking about this while it's right. Okay, so now you might be able to see that it's decided to blur the background for us, and it's worked out how deep the picture is, where the front and the back is. Now I can move this, so if I move this forward, or I can move it back. Now if I move it right back here, it's got the background in focus and it's taken the elephant out of focus. So I can move it around and I can sort of apply it. So let's sort of just take it to there. I can give it much more blur, a little bit less, play around with that, and then click OK. And that's now kind of created a little bit more separation as well. That kind of blur looks more like, slightly more like a kind of false blur that you get with mobile phones. So again, I can take it off and I can just nudge it back in a little bit, something like that maybe, and then that kind of just softens the background a little bit more, because ultimately what we're trying to do is we want our attention to be on the elephant. We don't want our attention to be so much on the background. So this combination of darkening the background, lightening the elephant, blurring the background, creating a little bit more texture and contrast, all these things hopefully ultimately get us to a point whereby if I then remove all these other layers that I've been playing around with, we've gone from that to that. And hopefully then that's kind of giving you a sort of slightly better version of your elephant. So the main thing here then, April, is to understand that when we've got a subject, we've got our key subject, that's what we're wanting to draw our attention to. And so then we've got to think, well, what's adding to the narrative, what's detracting from the narrative, what have I got to do to make that bit stronger? And in this case, the problem was essentially Patty the elephant is in the shade, it's lighter behind, so we have to darken the background, lighten her up, draw more attention to her. We can do that through light and dark, we can do it through contrast, we can do it through blur and sharpen, whatever other tools we feel we've got to our attention. And then hopefully we manage to kind of get our eye drawing much more to the place we want it to go. So I hope that all makes sense, but thanks very much for sending that one in, April. Right, okay, where are we at? Just a quick reminder that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can do it. And of course, don't forget to invite your friends as well to grow this wonderful little community of ours. And of course, if you've not done the subscribe, click the like on the algorithm on the bit down there. YouTube always likes the like button being hit for the algorithms. And yeah, so right, where are we at? Okay, comments here. Robert Schaefer says she's smiling. She obviously likes the intention. April says, I know, Robert, it was adorable. Susan says, elephants are my favourite animal, and Patty looks very happy. Would Patty look okay in black and white? That's certainly an option there as well. Actually, maybe we could go back and play with that. Calvin Kendall has said, hi from Sebago, Lake, Maine. Oh, welcome, Calvin. Glad you could join us. Actually, okay, let's tell you what, let's just do a little flick back here what would this look like in black and white? Well, the first thing, there's different ways of playing with black and white, as we said. There's channels. You can go red channel, green channel, blue channel, and that kind of, but because we kind of neutralize some of the colors, we're not really getting so much depth and contrast when we go into black and white. So another thing to do is to use the gradient map. Now, gradient map at the moment won't work because I've got it on purples and greys left over from messing around earlier with Sandra's photo. But if I take these colours here, the foreground colour and the background colour, to black and white, and then go to a gradient map, then this creates with more contrast. And there's different options. There's perceptual, linear, classic, smooth, and stripes, which just seems to make everything black. So we can choose which kind of black and white. So again, I quite like that one, although we've sort of lost the face. So other options then. Let's hit up here. Now, I think generally quite often when you're going into black and white, depending on the subject you're using, you might want to be adding more contrast. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go into Camera Raw filter. I'm going to go to the black and white, which has just created kind of neutral black and white. But now we've got the neutral black and white. I might just touch up that vignette a little bit more, but I'm going to go for a little bit more contrast, I think. I want to kind of really, bring a little bit more out of the shadow because I want to get some bit more of her face. bring those highlights down, maybe go to the effects, grab the clarity, something like that. Okay, I think that's kind of becoming a little bit more interesting. But we do have to, it's trying to make sure that you get the contrast, but without necessarily losing her face. And what I'm doing is I'm getting lost a bit of face here, but I do prefer it when there's a stronger contrast. So with that in mind, what I might do is I feel I've got more of what I want here, except for this part. So then what I might do is use the dodge tool, go to the midtones, and is that doing anything? No, actually not the midtones. Let's go to the shadows. Oh, let's just bring that up a little bit and just pull that up a little bit. And that just kind of helps lighten her face a little bit more. So we've gone from that to that. And this is kind of the key area that I'm wanting to just pull out a little bit. So yes, black and white I think is one of those that you could play with as well. But you would need to kind of, I might have started the edit slightly differently from the beginning if I was going to do black and white. The colour helps her stand out against what's a very busy background, because the background's green and she's not. Whereas when you go black and white, I think that busy background becomes more noticeable. So yeah, maybe I'll sort of play around slightly differently with that. But yeah, certainly always worth considering that. Okay, right, let's have a go. Let's see where we're at now. Galvatel Technologies is that this is VG, I think. She's logged in on a business account. Welcome VG. You just missed a picture of an Indian elephant in the Bronx Zoo. However, you can go back and take a look at that one later. Right, okay, so what we're going to do now is move on to Robert Schaefer. Now, Robert sent us this photo, and he said, I'm submitting this image for feedback consideration on Sunday's podcast. I took it in an old Victorian style home in mid-Tennessee. My wife and I were staying there, and this was taken from our room. I'm enclosing the raw image as what I've and what I've processed. So this is the processed one, which was processed in Lightroom as well as Topaz AI. It's not as sharp as I would like, especially in the lace curtains, but that is the best I could get. I'm also considering a black and white version. Okay, so what Robert's done is staying in this sort of old Victorian style house in mid-Tennessee, taken a photo. Now we've got sunshine and texture outside the window. We've got some sort of rose pattern style drapes and sit on this stool as well. I get on the stool. We've got some wood paneling, and so we've got, and he's edited it. Now I can see. So is then a but I suppose the first question is, what are you trying to communicate? What's the primary thing that grabbed you about this scene that made you say, okay, I want to take a photo of this. What is it I'm trying to capture? And then, has your editing done anything to enhance that original idea? Or is it getting in the way of, or has it been a bit difficult to try and work it out? And when I look at this photo, I'm kind of, I mean, yes, maybe there's something interesting in the drapes or the patterning or the lace curtains or the combinations, but I don't know that this photo is necessarily communicating that much to me. There's also a lot of light out the window where we've also got more patterns of the light hitting the trees. And the editing in this feels a little bit overcooked, I think. It feels quite, you've done a lot to kind of, you've brought up the shadows, you've dropped down the highlights, you've put everything into the kind of mid-range, and there's a lot of mid-range, but because there's a lot of pattern as well, it doesn't feel like it's really grabbing me. It feels like there's a lot of overlap without a sort of a focal point of attention. This is the bit I suppose really what it is I don't know which bit I'm supposed to look at first. Is this about me looking out the window, in which case if that was the primary thing, we then have all these other things like the drapes and the patterns and the wood and everything detracting from me. If we're supposed to be looking at this, then well, it's sitting at the bottom of the picture and our eye is actually kind of getting drawn out the window first. If we're trying to look at a combination of the patterns, then they're sort of spread out a lot. We've got the stool down here, we've got the drapes up here, we've got the drapes over there, but we've also got the complexity of the lace curtain. And what I tend to feel is that there's nowhere for the eye to go first. There's nowhere for the eye to go and settle and go, ah, that's what it's about. Like, oh, this is about the view out the window, or this is about that stool, or this is about the combination of, say, the patterning and the wood. In which case, something like that, you might want to come into a closer, find a little spot which becomes interesting, where you've got a combination of wood and pattern and lace curtain or something, and you would need to kind of move around to find something which has the combination where they are complementing each other. So I was kind of scratching my head with this, and then I realized that well, you know, you'd said that you'd sent the raw file, so I thought, well, okay, let's take a look at the raw file. And I'll open, and as soon as I saw the raw file, I went, ooh, okay, now I like this. There's something in this. This feels much more powerful. What I love about this is the light and the shadow. The light and the shadow immediately grabbed me. Completely raw, you've done nothing with it yet. But I'm thinking there's something beautiful about that soft window, that reflected light. The sunlight's not coming in directly, it's bouncing off the leaves on the trees and the street outside. And it's creating this really soft, beautiful shadow effect around the rest of the room. And then when I look at your photo, the way you've edited it has removed all that sense of light and shadow. This feels like you've got a yellow kind of overhead light on, which is sort of just not desaturating, detoning almost, really. Whereas this has a lot of lovely rich tones in it. And if I just open this straight, okay, let's get rid of Patty the elephant there. I think we're kind of onto something here. So what would I do with it? So we've got this lovely light, but there are some lovely patterns. I'll go back to this notion of, you know, you've got some interesting drapes there. There's something about that which you've liked. We've got again the pattern down on the stool. So maybe we want to draw some of that out, but I don't think we want to kill the shadows in the process, or at least we want to bring some of it up. So if we go into the raw file, or go into Camera Raw, now I should probably do this directly from the raw file itself, but I'm just doing quick edits to show you. So what we might do is start bringing the shadows up. Now, if I bring it up too much, you know, bring up this and then take down the highlights and what have you, then we start finding that we're kind of moving into this place where we've lost too much of the shadow. So we'll go back. I'll bring some of the shadow up, but not too much at the moment. Maybe lighten it a little bit and then bring down the highlights a touch. But actually maybe take that shadow down a bit. I'm wary of losing too much of this light, because now if the more I take the highlights down, the more we can see out of the window. Obviously that's brightening the window, so I think that's part of it. We're looking out, and I quite like this idea. We're looking out the window, but we've still got this interior here. Now, like I say, I don't want to bring the shadows up too much, because then I think we lose something. So we're playing here, and you're kind of looking for that little bit of adjustment there. Contrast, no, that's too little, too much. So first layer, I think I'm going to do something like this. Okay, so we're just lightening up parts of it. But then maybe what I want to do is I want to bring out a little bit more selectively of the texture. So for the moment, one of the quickest way for me to do this is if I go back into Camera on a separate layer, and I'll bring the shadows up a little bit more, create a little bit of contrast, maybe take the effect and create a little bit of clarity, something like that. Now the clarity is allowing me to bring out more texture in these parts, but it's perhaps actually not too bad on the wood either. But I think I'm not liking what it's doing with the wallpaper. So now, having done that, what I do is I hold down the Alt key and the mask, so I just mask it out. Now what I can do is I go to the paint, make sure this is on white, and I can paint in where I want a little bit more texture. So what I might want to do is, you can see I can now paint in a little bit more onto that bit of drape, just catch the light bits there, and down onto this little bit here. But also I did quite like what it did with the wood, so I'm going to just sort of bring out that little bit of texture of the wood there. Little bits of skirting board maybe, that little section in the middle, this little section down on the side over here, maybe back of the chair there. Not sure whether that bit's going to get cropped out later, but something like that. Now what happens if I do it over on this, yeah, on the reflection? I think you could maybe just about get away with it with the reflection part too. Probably not the plug, don't really need to, the socket, I don't really need to draw my attention to that. So now I think we're into something interesting, and I think this is kind of working a bit better. We're really trying to make the most. We've got the patterns, but we've also got this lovely sense of the light, because really that's what's grabbing. That's what grabs me. The minute I saw the raw file, it's the light. It's the light and the shadow. That's what's adding to the feel, the mood of what you're seeing. Whereas your original photo has kind of lost that, Robert. So I think we're kind of onto something here, and this is really the way I'd be tempted to go. Now we can, if we feel this is still a bit too dark, go for the levels. I can already see that I can go up to here without losing any detail at all. Maybe if I want to drag it up a bit more, I could drag it up a bit here, and then just use the paint back in where it's kind of where I've lost too much light there, something like that. So you can see now that then comes up to where it then starts to rise, and that kind of gives us a sense of it just makes it that little bit brighter. And I think we're really onto something. I think when you've got something like this is really capturing a little bit of mood here. Now you could, if you want, you could lighten up the insides a bit more. You can play around with it. You've got options here. This is just a starting point. This is a quick edit for you, Robert. But I think this is really kind of where you really want to be. It's in this region. Now, like I said, you can start lightening, darkening, all the rest of it. Also at this point, because we've got the lovely shadows, this is probably where it's going to work quite well in black and white as well. So let's go back and do just do a quick gradient map and see what that looks like. And interesting. Yeah, smooth, perceptual, bit too overkill, linear. Yeah, not bad. Ooh, classic. I quite like that classic. Okay, smooth. Classic, again, maybe a bit too dark in places. What I can do is underneath is just do a straightforward desaturation. That also works. Stick the gradient map over the desaturation, and then if I want, because the gradient map is creating a harder contrast, I can than the desaturation is, and then I can just kind of adjust that, pull it up, pull it down. If I wanted, I could mask particular areas, so I might want that contrast there, but maybe I'd say I wanted a little bit more detail out of the background here. I can just, let's do that 100% for the moment, to bring in a little bit more of the woodwork or something like that, where I feel I've just lost a bit too much on the edges perhaps. And I think, again, so here we are, now we've got the black and white. I think the black and white is really working well, because the narrative, the key thing that was grabbing me about this photo was the shadow, the light and shadow, the interplay between light and shadow, and the way then that light and shadow enhances the textures. So we can see just how much the textures in the pattern of the roses has become enhanced. The textures even in the lace curtains has become enhanced. And it's these contrasts which is really where the mood and the feel of the picture is at play. So I hope that helps there, Robert. So the key takeaways then with that are, first of all, is to identify what it is about the scene before you that's really grabbing your attention. And there's textures, sure, you've got the drapes, you've got the style, but then I think it's really there. It's the notion of the light, and it's the way the light is playing with these things. And I think understanding the light and shadow side of it is a really rich, important way of seeing, and a way of understanding how to communicate mood. There's so much of photography, I think, is about trying to convey mood, not just accuracy. We're not just trying to convey this is what it actually looks like. What we're trying to do is convey this is what it feels like. And that's a much harder thing to do. But use of shadow and light is one of the most powerful ways of conveying mood. So I think playing around with that is really the way to is the way to go. And then if you do have to have something where you've got a lot of that kind of light and dark ranges, then actually these ones very often lend themselves to black and white even better. When you remove the colour, the viewer is sort of kind of filling in the details themselves, and therefore it kind of feels like it's conveying even more of the mood. So I hope that helps. I hope that all makes sense to you, Robert. Thank you very much for sending that one in. Right, where are we? Okay, so VG's come back in on her own one. Says, good evening. Yes, that's me. So lots of hellos to VG. Meg says, I really like the diagonal of the red patterned curtain. VG says, I like the curtain, lace and patterns. I love Kim's edit too. If a pet was sitting on the tea table, that would be a perfect capture. Well, I think, yes, if you'd actually had a nice fluffy cat or something, I think would have worked sitting rather well there. April says, I agree with Kim, a totally different feeling. You can tell it's a pretty room. Robert says, the light coming in the window is definitely what got my attention. Well, excellent then. And that's the key thing to notice, that if you know, and I think sometimes this happens, is we see something and we grab it, and that's what grabs your attention. That's what takes the photo. And we're all guilty of it. We take it back, we put it in the Photoshop, and then we kind of feel like, oh, we've lost too much in the shadows there. Brighten up this, brighten up that. And we kind of end up pulling everything into the middle ground. So we lose everything in the shadows and we lose everything in the highlights. And to go on a slight tangent, try and avoid it being a rant, sometimes I think camera clubs can be a bit guilty for making us do this, because sometimes on the technicals with the camera clubs there can be, oh, you've lost too much in the shadows, mark you down. Oh, you've lost too much in the highlights, mark you down. And so we tend to kind of feel slightly wary about allowing the stronger contrast, because we've been burned before now by losing, so we don't want anything to be too bright, we don't want anything to be too dark, we push everything into the middle and we lose the contrast, and it's that contrast of light and shadow which so often elevates the mood. Susan says, Kim's edit gives it a more old-fashioned look, I think more in keeping his style with the room. April says, I like the black and white. Nadia says, would sepia give it a vintage look? It might, and probably would, but I think you've got to be slightly careful with sepia. Sepia is a very specific kind. It can very easily be overdone. I've seen too many sepia. It's a bit like selective colour or spot colour. It tends to be a technique which people kind of whack on for a kind of quick fix, and if it's not done really right, then I think you can kind of lose something. I tend to feel sepia quite often works better actually when you're trying to create an old style portrait more than a room photo. I would want a slightly different subject. I think in something like this, I think black and white actually works better than a sepia. I mean, you could go in, you could play with it. If you were going to add a sepia tone, I would want to be very, very subtle about it though. Not go too strong. And well, Robert says, your feedback definitely gives me a different way of looking at it. Excellent, I'm glad. I titled it On the Inside Looking Out. Well, if you titled it On the Inside Looking Out, then yes, the way you'd edited it was all about the room on the inside, but we were then being distracted by the view out the window. Whereas if you want to be able to see the view out the window, then the inside needs to be supporting the view, not clashing with the view. And I think the way I've edited it more with I was playing with the edits with that kind of darker inside and more contrasty inside probably helps that. Robert says also, you're definitely right about the camera club thing. Yeah, discussions I've had with other photographers on this one is kind of interesting. Sometimes I think part of the problem for almost any system which is judging photos is, what are you judging on? And it's much easier to judge a technical, is this directly on the rule of thirds line? Is this too bright? Is this too dark? And, is that colour too magenta or too orange or something like that? And you can, where there's a technical line and you can essentially almost use the numbers to judge it, that's an easier way to judge. It's a kind of foolproof method of judging as such, because does it match up with these numbers? Yes, it does, therefore it's right. But when you get into the notion of photography as not just a technical exercise, but an emotional, an artistic, a creative exercise, then what you are doing is you are conveying mood, you are conveying feeling, you are conveying something other than just a technical representation. And this, for me, is what photography is all about. Photography isn't about just creating an image, a likeness. It's like portraiture is portraiture. Portraiture, you're trying to capture something of a character, an idea. It's not anything which isn't. It's just a passport photo. You wouldn't call a passport photo good portraiture. A passport photo is an identification photo. And again, we've talked plenty of times before, you can photograph a mug and you can do it in such a way that it looks like a mug, which is great if you're going to sell it on eBay. Yes, this is what it looks like. So when somebody gets it, they're not surprised and go, I thought this was a purple mug, but this turns out to be a green one. It's not what I thought it was going to be. But when you're trying to convey mood, an idea, and a kind of artistic sense, creative sense, then it's not about always that. Now, we use the technicals to support it. Understanding too much light, too much dark, these things is really good. But you don't want to become a slave to them. What's more important is you're conveying the mood, not that this hits this particular number at this particular place. Because this hits this number at this particular place might be restrictive or might be somebody else's interpretation. So yeah, I could go off on a big rant on that one, but it's one of those things. Essentially, I talk about near enough every episode. I talk about, what are you trying to convey? What story are you trying to convey? What mood, what narrative, what idea, what feeling, what sense are you trying to convey? Because once you understand that, then everything else, every decision you make next, from the technical sides of the cameras to the light you're using, the composition you're using, all these different rules and ideas and how you edit it are there to support the narrative that you're trying to put across. But it's narrative first. It's narrative first. Does it make you feel, when you look at that photo, what you want it to make you feel? That's the most important part. Right, okay, yes, let's pull it back then. So there we go. Thank you ever so much to Sandra, to Robert and to April for sending in the images. You all get a bonus 25 smug points, so that'll mess around with the Smug Points Leaderboard. The next few weeks get a little bit patchy. Now, next week, there will be no podcast. The job that I mentioned at the end of last week has come through. So next Sunday, I'm going to be working all day. So no podcast, I'm afraid. So this means that the abstract photo challenge is bumped forward to the following week. So the 29th of September is when we will be having we'll be going through the submissions to the abstract challenge. So you've got an extra week to go around and play. If you can't remember, or you're looking for inspiration for the abstract challenge, go back and take a look at last week's episode 209, where I talked about abstract, threw up all sorts of examples, different ideas of where you can go with it. And from now on, for the next week or over the next 2 weeks, start sending me your images. Don't leave it until the very last minute, because I have to have time to be able to compile all the images. But if you can certainly get them to me before Friday the 27th, that would make my life an awful lot easier. And then the week after that, the first one in October, sometime around the 4th or some 5th or whatever it is. I'm afraid I'm not going to be here either. We're disappearing for a few days on a little family break. But the abstract challenge at the end of September. That will also be the last points opportunity, Smug Points opportunity for September and for the third quarter. So get your images in, and you'll all get 10 Smug Points for submitting an image to the challenge. And then of course there will be my selections of first, second and third for an extra 30, 20 and 10 Smug Points as well, and that could upend the whole leaderboard. Right, so I think that's pretty much us. Thank you ever so much once again to all of you for turning up and leaving your comments. And oh, wrong one. What am I doing? I'm trying to do, that's what I'm doing. Okay. Yes, and I will see you all next week. No, not next week. I will see you all in a fortnight. Look forward to seeing what you put in for the abstract challenge. Take care. Bye-bye.